We're going to take a look now at how we can work with ISO files. And the first thing we're going to do is look at how we can create an ISO file. An ISO file is a single file that represents then an ISO file system, and it's created by reading in files from the file system. In this way we can easily then distribute information and perhaps even burn it through to a CD or DVD. Here we're looking at creating a file system from the boot directory. We can see the final parameter says /boot. So we're going to create an ISO file. We can read back from that and we'll see the ISO file that we're creating is /temp/boot.iso. So we're going to have one file, and that file is going to be an ISO file system, and it's going to be created from the contents of the boot directory. We're then setting up some parameters for this. -o is just saying the output file that we create. And then the -j and the -r really saying the directory information that we're going to maintain. So the -j or capital J that we're using here is the Joliet directory information. So that allows for uppercase and lowercase names. And then the -r is the Rock Ridge directory extensions that we're putting on. The -V is just labeling the ISO file. So if we mounted this, say, in a virtual machine, we would see this as the disk label. But also if we burned this to DVD, it would show as the disk label. Once we've created an ISO file, we could then mount this within our Linux file system. Incidentally, in Windows 8 they have inbuilt the opportunity to mount ISO files to drive letters, but it's taken them a little while to include it in the operating system, whereas it's been standard in Linux for years. So they've always been mountable within Linux, and to be able to mount it we can use mount -o loop. So our mount option is going to be loop, so we're using one of the loopback devices. We're choosing then to mount the boot.iso file, so /temp/boot.iso, and we're going to mount it to the directory /mnt. If we needed to make this permanent, we could add it to our fstab file, and in which case it would look something like this. So our fstab file device would be the boot ISO, where we're mounting it to, so /mnt. The file system types are ISO 9660, auto, loop as our mount options, and obviously not including it for the dump backup system or a file system check. If we were using a UDF file system, perhaps because this is a DVD image that we had created, then it would be the UDF file system type. So let's take a look at this working from our command lines, both making and creating these ISO files. So back on the command line then of our CentOS 7 system, we're going to look at using ISO fs. And like everything, if I go through and do a -- help, we can see then that I get a bucket load of information explaining all of the switches. And of course, for more information, we could go through into the man page. There are a lot of switches because, of course, we have to be able to support different types of ISO files for different operating systems. And a lot of that then relates to the extensions that we include, such as the Joliet file system and such as the Rock Ridge file system. We also might need to be able to support a bootable device, so the -b option, and then pointing to the boot file that we're going to use. So there are lots of options, and we'll just look at a few of those options. So we can use then ISO fs. -V then is going to put on our label, so yeah, we just call it, let's say, my label. So that would then show in the mounted device or as the label as the DVD that we create or CD. -J then includes the Joliet file system. which is allowing then for uppercase and lowercase names, so preserving the case of the name. If we don't include that, then you're going to find that everything then goes across as an uppercase name. We can include then the Rock Ridge file system, or directory entry tables really. So when we put in two directory entry extensions here, like the Joliet and the Rock Ridge, we're really storing file names more than once. We're creating more than one directory entry table. And this is often needed based on the fact that we need to put these into different systems. The Rock Ridge extensions we've got two options for, either the capital R or the lowercase r. The lowercase r typically is used these days because it's just rationalized some of the other options, so reducing some of the options in the way that file names can be displayed. But this is typical that we're going to use the Joliet and the Rock Ridge extensions. When we then go through, we're specifying the output file name, and of course this could go anywhere, but I'm just going to go through and put it into temp and boot.iso. As we then go through, we specify the directories or files that we want included. So here I'm going to include the contents of the boot directory. So of course the directory is not huge, so it doesn't take a vast amount of time to create, but there we go, it's now done. As we look, we can kind of get to see the size of some of the directory attributes that have been added. If I use the minus lowercase v for verbose, I'd see more output. If I clear out the screen now, we can look at mounting this. So I can use mount, and then it's going to be -O for our options. And we say this, we want the loopback devices. And we're going to mount then our temp/boot.iso, and we'll mount it through to the /mnt. When we go through and take a look at the mount command, and let's go through and search for MNT, we can see there that we've mounted it, and it is then an ISO file system. And of course, running the list command, we can see, sure enough, we've got the contents of the boot directory. So we can see then these are standard tools that are provided in Linux. You might have to install it, perhaps if you run a minimal install, but it is quite common to have it as part of your distribution install. Let's jump back now into the slides so we can start looking at encrypted file systems.